Welcome to Tech Conversations with Grace Chng, a podcast series by News on Tech, which aims to raise business leaders' intelligence on horizon and future technologies. Tech Conversation will engage tech experts to highlight the technologies that have the potential to create substantial advancements in the future and significant impact industries, economies, and societies. In this podcast, we have Miles Upton, Regional General Manager Asia for CapGemini. He has worked in several technologies across mobile, wireless, semiconductor, industrial, medtech, and consumer industries. Introduce yourself, Miles. Tell us a little bit more about how many years you've spent in Asia.
So I've been here 27 years.
Oh, that's a long time.
That's quite a long time, yeah. So it's but always in East Asia. So Japan, Korea, China, Taiwan, where deep tech happens in Asia.
Right. Okay. So today we're going to talk about synthetic biology.
Yep.
So I admire Jennifer Doudna,
Hmm.
the American biochemist who won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry. I think she pioneered work in CRISPR, gene editing, and this gene editing techniques, which can modify a piece of DNA, and of course will open up gene therapy.
Yep.
Now, just a word here. Why are we talking about synthetic biology, which is not really tech, right? But I think that it is the impact of technology, especially AI, on biology, and it is this intersection
Yeah.
which is making it so exciting.
Yes, I think what we've seen in the last 10 years is a rapid evolution in, we tend to call it engineering biology now because
Mhm.
we've moved into engineering biology to make the performance much better of biological components. So, and AI is one of the components that will do that, and we can talk a bit more about how that works. But overall, it is becoming applicable across many industries. So if you look at AI applies to almost every
Yeah,
industry.
it is an enabler.
It's an enabler to every industry. Synthetic biology doesn't cover as many industries,
Mhm.
but it will impact many industries in the next 5 to 10 years, and
It
some of
is
them today.
it is multidisciplinary, right?
Yes, yeah. I mean, you have to combine biology with sensing, with real time
Mm.
um, prediction, and then you have to use AI then to work out how to improve particular biological compounds. That's the way to make it more efficient and faster.
So it is an area which is already happening today. That means we have
Yep.
products that is a
Yep.
result of engineering biology, as you call it,
Yep.
and then there are things that are coming up in the future, right?
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about this and what's happening today?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing to understand is engineering biology. So you gave the example of DNA
Mhm.
earlier, and that's a big area. So gene therapy, for example, is hugely impactful. It's
Mm.
already happening today
Mhm.
in small numbers,
Mhm.
but it's very expensive. Hundreds of thousands of dollars per treatment per patient.
Right.
But a single treatment and you can cure people.
Yes.
So that's great. But there are other applications, not just DNA. So enzymes, proteins, algae, for example,
Mhm.
where there are different benefits to different industries. So it's broadly applicable across many industries.
When we had a previous conversation,
Yeah.
you said that synthetic biology is already here in cosmetics.
Yes. Yeah.
So can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that too?
Yes. So, for example, one of the components used in cosmetics and also used in medicine is something called hyaluronic acid.
Oh, that's the one that goes into my knee.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Makes it
Yeah.
more spongy.
Yeah. So, but it's also used in high-end cosmetics as an
Mhm.
ingredient now.
Mhm.
And traditionally, that used to be made from chicken combs.
So
So,
that the
so
red
waste of,
flesh
yeah,
on top of the rooster.
exactly. And now it's made with precision fermentation.
Right.
So it's made from biological feedstock and no animal byproducts are used in it. And that for the brands that use this product, there's obviously a brand benefit to not using a animal byproduct in
Mhm.
cosmetic, for
Mhm.
example.
So what else is engineering biology in?
So it's across a lot of industries. I mean, so we've talked about life sciences,
Mhm.
we've talked about cosmetics,
Mhm.
food, of course. I mean,
Right.
in Singapore, we've seen Singapore's the first country to do engineered meat
Mhm. Mhm.
for human consumption with chicken. Um, and we've seen it in areas like energy. So we are looking at substitutions for petrochemicals, basically.
Right.
And that is actually one of the biggest areas, I think, where it will have an impact.
So that's one of the areas that is substituting diesel with marine biofuels, right?
Yeah.
So can
So
you talk a little bit about that?
yeah. So I mean, it's really interesting. I find it fascinating that oil was originally algae.
Mm. Yes.
Millions of years ago,
Yes.
algae got trapped under the ocean floor
Yeah.
and it became oil.
Mhm.
But you can make algae through, you can grow algae with seawater or fresh water. And as a result, you can use that as fuel.
Mm.
And if you get the right algae, you can, for something like marine diesel, which doesn't require very high purity,
Mhm.
you can almost use it directly without refining. And that's staggering. You can
Right.
go straight from seawater, algae, sunlight, straight to fuel.
How far away are we from that?
Well, it needs scaling. I mean, more than 5 years, probably less than 10 years. Um, and the scale thing is a really interesting point here. A lot of what engineering biology will deliver
Mm.
is novel ways to make chemicals, for
Mhm.
example, and particularly that reduction on the reliance of petrochemicals as a feedstock is
Mhm.
great,
Mhm.
but it's expensive. It's not as cheap as existing processes. So some plastics have been made for 100 years,
Yeah.
and in 100 years, everybody's optimized everything to make it really cheap.
Right.
So if you're running a high volume industrial chemical plant, you're not going to replace it today. But if you're doing something higher value, you might replace it with an engineered biology approach, which will maybe give you better performance, less reliant on petrochemicals. Maybe it will save you, give you some brand benefit, for example.
And we can speed up this process using technology, using AI.
Yeah, yes,
And that is machine learning.
yes. So, well, generative AI. So we're using approaches where we take generative AI.
Mhm.
And we effectively teach it the language of biology,
Mm.
if that makes
Okay.
sense. So, and then we do prompt engineering for biology, I
Right.
guess is the
Yeah.
way you could
Yeah.
characterize it.
Yeah.
So we can go from doing everything in the lab to only doing 20% in the lab
Mhm.
and 80% in compute, so
Right.
in data analysis and AI. And when you do that, you can speed everything up because the 80% speeds up at the rate that AI is speeding up.
Right.
And biology, you can't speed up at that rate.
Yeah, because it's very process oriented, right?
Yeah.
It's all happening
And
in the lab.
and we know as people, biological reactions, you can't heat an organism up.
Yeah.
It doesn't live. You
Right.
can't speed it up by heating it up or
Yeah.
something. So there's limits to how much you can speed things up in
So the
biology.
testing that comes with technology allows
Yeah.
the
So you need smart sensing. So there's lots of sensing approaches you need
Mhm.
to understand what's happening.
Mhm.
But yeah. So yeah, there's lots of technology that can be applied, and it's
Okay.
working today.
So apart from sustainability,
Hmm.
what other areas synthetic biology can impact industries?
So one of the areas we've certainly looked at is enzymes.
Hmm.
So one example is an enzyme called PETase.
Right.
So PET is a big issue, so
Mhm.
and recyclability of PET is a big
That's plastics, is it?
plastic.
Right.
So all your beverage bottles.
Okay.
So you go to a 7-Eleven, you pick up a beverage bottle. Usually that clear plastic is PET,
Okay.
and PET today can be recycled,
Right.
but after 5 or 6 times, it loses the ability to be recycled.
Right.
But there's an enzyme that can recycle it infinitely. So it takes PET back to virgin PET.
Mm.
Um, at the moment, that's still being scaled up. It's probably 5 years away. There's a startup in France, for example, we're aware of that's doing these kind of things. But when that happens, you can see there'll be impact on how industry supply chains will change
Right.
because companies will be able to recycle their drinks bottles more closely within a given geography, for example.
Okay. Let's talk about hold that thought on
Yep.
supply chain a little bit later.
Yep.
But I want to pursue this about other things that you can biomass, for example.
Yep.
E-waste, converting e-waste into
Yep.
biomass. Is that something that's big?
Yeah. E-waste, I think, is much further out.
Mm.
There are there are certainly people looking into developing biological approaches to process e-waste and extract things. And again, that will reduce the reliance on existing supply chains. So you will see people will be processing with it. So within the US, they may process more e-waste and
Right.
generate more inputs for manufacturing rather than having to get everything from Asia or somewhere.
Right. So, what are so we've got all this technology, all
Yeah.
this science. How is it being applied in industry?
So there's lots of industries, as I mentioned earlier, lots of industries that could be affected.
Yeah.
Some industries, the impact will be minimal. So, for
Right.
example, if you look at the automotive industry,
Yep.
where everything's made of metal,
Yes.
you're not really going to see an impact on
Right.
lots of that aspect of it. But if you're in the industries like food and beverage, we've talked about life sciences,
Right.
agri-tech, sustainability, energy, these industries will be affected, and the impacts are variable.
Yeah.
So, for example, if you're in the textile industry, so you're in high fashion,
Yes.
we're looking at things like making artificial leather from
Right.
mushrooms.
Okay. Oh, okay.
I sell them. So
Can I eat the leather as well?
that's a good question. I don't know, actually. I'm not sure how it's treated. That's a very good question.
Okay.
But you can do that, and so you can see that, particularly as a consumer benefit, as a
Right.
brand benefit, being able to move away from leather, which some consumers won't have, particularly for high brands, it's great because they can
For the haute couture industry.
exactly,
Yeah.
and they can afford the cost because it's going to be more expensive than
Right.
leather, which is obviously a thousands of year old
Yeah.
industry. Certainly in the short term, but long term, the cost will come down and then become more applicable.
Right. So at some point where the cost of the
hmm
existing material and the cost of the new material will kind of like meet, right?
Yep.
And is that the inflection point?
I think every industry will be different
Mm.
and every point will be different. A lot of times it will be, it can't compete on cost because of the optimization,
Okay.
but it can, uh, it can bring other benefits. You can develop novel materials that you can't get from existing approaches. For example, we used it for bioluminescence.
Okay.
So bioluminescence, fireflies.
Mm.
Um, and this is a biological component that glows in the dark.
Right.
And we looked at using that, and in 4 weeks we were able to make a better version of a bioluminescent compound.
And what would that be used for?
Well, you might have applications where you need something that glows in the dark without batteries, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see areas where those kind of bioluminescence could be useful. The applications are still being worked out, but it's that kind of benefit that can justify the cost in the right application.
So I would say petrochemical, manufacturing, food,
Yeah.
agriculture, those will be the major industries.
Well, petrochemical will be affected in potentially because it's a replacement for petrochemicals.
Right.
And that's a benefit to many companies because it makes their supply chain more resilient.
Right.
So you can get away from being just reliant on petrochemicals for everything you do.
Right. So as a business,
Yep.
and we have petrochemical is large in Singapore.
Yep.
So is agriculture in the region.
Yep.
And manufacturing as well. So businesses, what would business leaders need to look at and prepare themselves?
I think if any business that has a significant supply chain in a material supply chain needs to think about how engineering biology will affect that supply chain.
Could you give an example?
Yeah. So yes, if we go back to the bottle example, then we can see that the recyclability of those things will be better, and that's better for sustainability.
Right.
And therefore, from a regulatory, because obviously Europe, the US, etc., are introducing new sustainability regulations.
Right.
You can meet your regulatory requirements through engineering biology.
So you need to keep an eye on what are the materials or
Yeah.
what are the biological components that
Yep.
are going to be engineered to replace the plastic
Yeah,
bottles.
you need to look at your supply chain and work out, well, in 5 years' time, we're going to have new things. And changes to supply chain are very difficult for big companies. I
Okay,
mean,
so you need to do your factories, for example, will have to change, right?
yeah, and location of your factories might change
Ah, okay.
because your feedstock's changing.
Right.
For example, a lot of the time the feedstock might be cane sugar.
Mm-hmm.
So where you get cane sugar from versus where you get oil from is very
Yeah.
different.
Yeah.
So you might look at relocating your factories to where the feedstock is in certain cases. And you can also look at, as I say, more circular economy opportunities potentially in the future. But that's further out, I see.
Right. Right.
And then if you look at things like the DNA applications, that's different again because there the regulatory hurdles are higher.
Right. So
Um,
these are some of the challenges,
yeah,
right?
so I think companies need to look at regulatory
Okay.
because regulatory is both an opportunity and a threat.
Right. Right. So in the healthcare, in medicine, for
Yeah,
example, the
yeah,
regulation bar is much higher,
it's very
right?
high. Yes.
But if you're plastic bottles,
Yeah,
the regulatory it's
yeah,
much low.
exactly. And if you're in polymers, textiles, for example, so using engineering biology to make biopolymers, removing the need for again petrochemical feedstock is better potentially, and makes your product more sustainable potentially, and therefore that's a benefit that you can meet regulations because we know that the fashion industry is highly polluting,
Yeah.
and people will look for new ways to do things.
Right. So it is not only good for your reputation to
Yeah.
be able to use all these novel products, it
Mm.
is also opens up new opportunities
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
So it's new revenue opportunities as well for
Potentially,
businesses.
you can add more features to your products, etc., which you wouldn't do with existing chemicals.
Right, right. So I think all is interesting, but
Mm.
are there any pitfalls?
Well, the regulatory ones are quite significant in some industries.
Hmm.
I think one of the biggest things is that we see is people think that by using biology, it's automatically more sustainable.
Yes.
It may reduce reliance on carbon,
Right.
definitely,
Yes.
but it may not be more sustainable. So you have to do a full life cycle analysis. And in some cases, the answer is it's actually less sustainable. So when you're doing fermentation, you can release methane, for example,
Yes. And
which
that
is
is also bad.
that's a polluting gas, for
Yeah.
example.
Right.
So you need to look at these kind of impacts as you go through. And again, we see a lot of companies engaging with this. We're working in across Europe, US, Japan on these kinds of projects.
So just to sum it up,
Hmm.
what are the things we know what's happening now?
Yeah.
Right. So what are some of the things that's midterm and the future?
So I think midterm we will see more applications, particularly in recycling and novel biopolymers, for example.
Right.
So that will come fairly soon. Longer term will be things like e-waste processing,
Hmm.
where that's further out. And people even talk about e-mining, so biological mining. So using biological compounds to leach to help extract ores mine from mined minerals.
Right. So thank you very much, Miles, for
Thank you.
that interesting comments and observations on synthetic bio. What do you call engineering
We
biology?
call it engineering biology because that's what we do. We're engineering biology
Biology.
for the benefits of uh, the society and for the benefit of business.
Well, thank you very much, Miles.
Thank you.
This podcast is brought to you by CapGemini.